Good evening. Welcome to our Tuesday night podcast. This is the Door Christian Fellowship Church, and we are going to have a good conversation tonight. I am Jordan. I'll be hosting tonight. As always, this is Pastor Ford.
Hello.
He's not on yet.
Yeah, it's okay. 1, 2, test, 1, 2.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. We've done some playing around here, so bear with us if anything acts funny. Or if you guys can't hear anything, you can throw that in the chat section. And we will try to fix that as quick as possible, but I think we have everything pretty squared away. So tonight we're going to be talking about, as a matter of fact, today is week 52. This is our 1 year cap,
one-year
right
anniversary.
here. Technically, our anniversary I think would be next week, but this is our 1 year cap off. So
Okay.
what a great way to cap off an entire year of podcasts, and we've had ebbs and flows of subjects and some very controversial, some common, but tonight is what we are here for. And so to show you why we're here and what it actually means to be saved, our goal is to see people be saved so we can explain what that even means for those of you that don't know. And for those of you that do know, this is a great resource for you to find out how you can help other people. So this is a great resource all the way around. Let's start right off by saying, what exactly does it mean to be saved in this context? What does it mean to be saved?
Well, that's the thing I think is interesting about this is that the idea of being saved is, I think if you ask anybody, they'll tell you, oh, I know what it means to be saved. And as always, what I'm going to talk about tonight probably isn't the description that most people use when talking about what it means to be saved. Because I'm coming from a standpoint of what it's like to not be saved. Mm-hmm. To have never been saved, to actually have an existence for the first 20 years of my life of not knowing what salvation is. And then I got saved. And so not that I'm just looking at it from an experiential standpoint, but from the standpoint of what it truly means, for somebody who has not been saved to actually get saved, has not been raised in a religious environment.
Mm-hmm. So what is that?
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, maybe just the kind of short answer, like
yeah.
What's the...
Yeah. Well, really, the reality of the word, is, talking about the idea of being made whole. That's the idea, is to be made whole.
Okay. So you just made a comment a second ago about coming from the standpoint of having not been saved, or, from somebody who isn't saved and doesn't know what it means. Why is there any confusion? What would bring any kind of, delusion or confusion around the definition of being saved? Why does it have to be defined?
Tomorrow night, I'm going to be preaching about.
Here we go again.
Always, but I'm not stopping from saying this. I'm just kind of introing into it. Is that I'm going to be talking about people's deconversion, and the bottom line is that a lot of these deconversion experiences, I question whether or not they were saved in the first place. So I'm not sure that they actually converted in order to deconvert. And that's the key, is that I think what a lot of people think being saved is really just becoming religious.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, what define what is being religious? And we've talked about this a lot over the last year, but give us like a clear definition of what it means to be religious.
Well, when I use the word, it might not be how other people think of it, but just the general idea of just adhering to religious beliefs. Like a Muslim would follow the teachings of Muhammad. Hindus would they would follow their teachings. Buddhists, their teachings, and for the most part, I guess what I'll call religious Christians, following what they believe to be the teachings of the Bible.
Mm-hmm. So what does that look like? Like, because we know all Christians go to church, saved and religious.
Yeah.
They all go to church. So what's the difference between somebody who's saved and somebody who's religious when they go to church? What's the difference in experience? What's the difference in expectation? What's the difference between the two?
Well, I think the main thing is when you talk about being saved, is this is something that God does. God saves us. Like I said in the beginning, it's to be made whole. And that would be the question that I would ask anybody who claims to be a Christian. Are you whole? Genuinely, not theoretically whole. Are you whole? Are you actually whole? Can you, when you look at your life and you look at how your life was before you met Jesus and after you met Jesus, can you look at your life and say, you know what? When Jesus came into my life, I had everything that I needed. And again, not just being theoretical, just saying, oh, theoretically, I have everything I need, and doing what I call Christian lying, which is basically, saying stuff that's not true because you don't want to discredit, your religion. And so you say things, to try to, because you don't want to discredit your religion.
Mm-hmm. So take me into that. What is being whole? You're talking about something being put there that wasn't there before, like something that's incomplete. I'm thinking of forgive me for the food thing here, but a pie that's been remade in a sense, pie that's half eaten, that's recreated to make a whole pie again. What's missing?
Actually, so we'll use your analogy and say it this way: is a pie without any filling?
Okay,
it's just a crust.
All right, yeah.
It's just a crust. It looks good, looks nice. It's got a top on everything. We're not talking about half of it or a whole pie. It's just crust. But there's nothing inside of it. That is what I mean when I talk about being made whole. It's actually when God puts the filling in, what's supposed to be in there that's not there.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds really mystical. But how does that look like in the common mind? How do you simplify that to make it understandable?
Well, yeah, it's not. I can understand how you could make something like that mystical, but the bottom line is that when I think back over my life before I became a Christian, there was clearly something missing.
Did you consciously feel that?
Yeah, absolutely. There was something missing. It was like I couldn't put my finger on it, but I would try things, and the trying of those things never really seemed to get me to that place to where I said, yeah, that's it. That's it. Now I got it. It was always, okay, well, that was good, but I'm sure there's better. And it was always that. It didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter whether it was a positive thing, didn't matter whether it was a negative thing, didn't matter if it was a legal or illegal. It didn't make any difference. No matter what I did, it was always like, okay, well, that was good, but that was like everything. It's like going to a theme park. It's just like, that was fun, but, it's not real life, and that was always the case. So I you get a good job, and finally I got a really good job. But after being at that job for months, a couple of months or something like that, all of a sudden it was just a normal job. It wasn't a good job anymore. It was just a normal job. Mm-hmm. Or a relationship. Meeting a girl and starting to spend time. Oh, this is it. This is the one. And then it's just another relationship, mm-hmm. And so everything in life seemed to take that kind of no matter what it always became just ordinary. There was nothing, okay, this is it. Okay, I've got the girl that I want to spend the rest of my life with, or I've got the job that I want to keep forever, or I've got the amount of money that I've always wanted, or I've got the car that I've wanted, or it just didn't matter what it was in life that I had pursued. And once I achieved it, there was never this feeling like, that's it. Okay. So, step one to my ultimate experience in life. None of it ever felt like a step. It was never a step. It was like, okay, this is just more of the same.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that that's a conscious thought in everybody that's not saved?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's a reality that everyone has without Jesus, that whatever they're involved in life is just a stepping stone to something more concrete later on. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is good, but this is not it. Mm-hmm. There's something else that's beyond that.
So, okay. All right, so let's do a bit of sort of role play, one-sided. But let's say I'm somebody that's not saved. How would you go about trying to convince me that that's the case in my own existence?
Well, I don't have to convince you that you're not saved.
No. I don't mean convince me that I'm not saved, but how would you help me to identify that lack?
Okay. Well, the bottom line is about having a personal relationship with Jesus. That it has to begin there. It's not a religion. It's not joining a religion. It's a personal relationship with Jesus. It has to start with this encounter. There has to be this encounter with Jesus. It has to begin there. There's no two ways about it. And there are a lot of people that are in church. That's why I mentioned about this. There's been a lot of people on YouTube who have these deconstruction, they call them deconversion experiences, and what they all seem to say the very same things. Most of them were raised in church, but from their conversation or when they're interviewing, from their own expression of their interview, from the standpoint of somebody that is saved, being my own, is I look at that and I think that's not salvation. That's just religion. You went to church as a kid. You weren't really all that interested in it. Then all of a sudden you became a teenager and you started to have a serious interest in it. And then so you started going more often. But usually what they mean is the same thing that non-Christian teenagers mean, is that I started to feel my need to belong, and so this was my environment. I needed to belong. And so I started belonging, with the other people in church. But it's not conversion. They didn't have an encounter with Jesus. It's just they started belonging. So they started going to various meetings, various youth group meetings and things like that. And then out of that, they would hear things in the youth group that was basically, this is what we believe. This is what being a part of us is. That kind of thing is like, oh, okay, well, I need to pray, because we pray, the group prays. I need to read my Bible because the group reads the Bible. And so they're starting to do these things on the basis of what the group is doing and being a part of being accepted into that crowd. And I think that's often the reason why when they go away to university or they go to high school, sometimes it happens in high school, is they realize that there's a bigger group to be a part of. And so they just stop being Christians, because it's like there's a lot of people at this school that are not Christians, a bigger group than the Christians. I only know 5 Christians, but here's 50, 60 non-Christians, something like that. And so it's like, well, what do I need to do to be part of the in crowd of the non-Christians? Because that's a bigger group. And that seems to be more, where I want to be, from that standpoint of that sense, what every teenager goes through, that desire to belong, that desire to be a part of the larger crowd, the larger group, rather than just going to school with your 5 friends, when you've got, a school of hundreds of people and you want to be a part of that, and you realize, well, I can't be a part of that and be a Christian, so I'll just stop being a Christian.
Yeah.
So there's never been an encounter with Jesus. And that's my point. That's the main point. And so trying to convince you of that reality, I would just start right there. You don't know Jesus. And so it doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. None of that matters. All that matters is, do you know Jesus? Have you encountered him?
So you're touching on some of the points I'm asking about, but mainly what I'm looking for is because you said that you could consciously identify a lack in something. There was something missing. And so my question is, how would you help somebody else to identify that? So you can tell them you haven't had an encounter with Jesus, or say if you haven't had an encounter with Jesus, but how do you help them to identify the fact that that's what's missing?
Oh, I don't think I would, honestly, when I talk to people, I don't spend a lot of time trying to convince them that they have a lack in their life, because they may not see it. It's not something that's obvious,
Yeah.
It's more of, like in my life, it was very subtle. It was at quiet moments. There were subtle, quiet moments in my life when I would be introspective. I would just be at a point in my life that I'm, sitting on the couch, I'm by myself, and then all of a sudden I would be taking inventory of my life and think, yeah, really, this isn't what I wanted. I'd look at my age, look at my achievements, and look at what I've done, and I would look at those things and I would say, it's not adding up the way that I had hoped it would add up. And it wasn't a question of that. I thought I was a loser and somehow was not amounting to something, because there were times like that But that wasn't the issue. The issue wasn't I'm a loser or I'm a winner, or I've achieved or I haven't achieved. It was just taking stock of my life. And it's like, something's, there's a puzzle piece that's missing, and people talk about things like, the God-shaped hole and all that kind of stuff. And
Those are the words that came into my mind exactly.
and that's often the things that are said, but it's not that. It's just an awareness that there's just not a completion, that I just the sense of being incomplete. And from my observations, you look at people that have made, built big companies, or have made a lot of money, somehow their name is in the news, they're, on Forbes, various places. And then you start to hear about them and things like, their family life, how friends describe them as being full of themselves or antisocial, things like that. And I think those are the kinds of things that are what come into question, as a through life. That what I'm talking about when I talk about lack is that, but it may not be something that you notice as this, constant thing. It can sometimes just simply be this sort of posture, of life where you realize, man, how come I've achieved what I've achieved, I've done what I've done, but how come I'm not feeling somehow accomplished? And I think that's probably a better way of describing it. How come I don't have this? How come I can't just look at my life and think I've accomplished? I'm doing well. Not just I'm doing well in this area or that area, but the whole general picture. How come we can't get to that place? And I think that's what I'm talking about. So I don't think that I would try to tell somebody there's a lack.
Right.
As much as what I just described there is the idea of, doesn't it seem to you like everything you try, there's always something more, that's out there. There's not that sense of contentment.
Right. I'm going to ask this question. I don't mean it to sound like religious or anything like that. It's genuine when I ask it. But there's a story that was on my mind. There's a story in the Bible of Zacchaeus. He's a short guy. He's basically a spectator, and he's also a tax collector. And so Jesus randomly, in when you read the story, randomly turns to Zacchaeus and says, "Today I'm going to dine at your house." And then he comes to his house, and Zacchaeus, out of the blue, says, "If I've stolen anything, I'll return it multifold." And then Jesus says, "Today salvation has come to this house."
Yeah.
How do you explain that kind of? So you're talking about an encounter with Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the reason why it came into my mind.
Yeah.
But no miracle, no big huge event. It was just like Jesus came to his house.
Yeah.
And this guy was obviously wealthy if he had the money to pay people back multifold.
Yeah.
And so, but he's willing to give it all away. And then there's this response from Jesus saying, "This guy just got saved," or "Salvation has come to this house." How do you explain that? There's no, like I said, there's no big miracle. There's no big bang.
Right.
It's just Jesus meets somebody, they meet him, and all of a sudden they want to give their money away.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
Well, that's what I mean about encounter. When I use the word encounter, that's why I didn't, often the word is used, if you just met Jesus or, ask Jesus to come into your life, have a personal relationship with Jesus. Those kinds of things are, it's because it's so I have a personal relationship with God. Well, when somebody says that, what do they really mean? That I don't discount, people's sincerity, but I know what they mean. They don't mean a relationship like what you have with a person.
Mm-hmm.
They don't mean that. That what they mean is that I have my belief. I have my own belief in God. That, I have a personal relationship with God. No, what they mean is I have a belief in God, and often that I have a personal relationship with Jesus. Often the next phrase that comes after that is, so I don't need to talk to you about this. And so it's like, if you had a personal relationship with Jesus, you would want to talk about this with me. You'd want to, because we would be on the same page. But what often people are talking about is just what they believe. Mm-hmm. That's what they mean when they say I have a personal relationship. What they mean is I believe this, and I don't want to argue with you about it because these are my beliefs. They're not the beliefs. They're my beliefs, and it's my Jesus, the one I created in my own head, that obeys my laws and follows my belief patterns, which is not an encounter with Jesus. That's just simply making something up, and it's not the same thing.
So I don't know if you've kind of already answered the question, but it's Kay is asking, how do you explain the encounter with God experience?
Well, like you said about Zacchaeus,
Yeah.
there's that reality that I'm wanting, my life. He says, if I've stolen anything, I'm going to restore, I'm going to give half of my goods, I'm going to give to the poor. All of a sudden there's all these attributes that just show up out of nowhere, and that personally, that's probably the greatest indicator to me that somebody's had an encounter with God is, what does it do to them as a person? How does it change them as a person instantaneously? Not how does it change them over years?
Yeah.
But instantaneously. I want to. So what I want to know from the deconversion experience is, I'd like to hear, I was like this. I met Jesus. I instantly changed and became like this. And then years later, I realized this was all bunk. That's what I want to hear. That would be a genuine deconversion experience. But I've never heard that. And I've never heard that. All I've heard is, I was a religious person. I got very serious about my religion. I developed my own belief system, and then I walked away from it. And it's like, that's, so what? I mean, people do that all the time. There's nothing weird or unusual about that. Most people, whatever religion they are, as they grow up, they walk away from it, whether it's Hindu or Muslim. I mean, there's a lot of Muslims that have come over to our country, and as soon as they get here, they start partying and stuff, which is totally a violation of what they were raised with. Their parents would be very upset if they saw them smoking and drinking and going to nightclubs and stuff like that. Be very upset, but it's super common. It's super common for people to walk away from their religion, including Christianity. There's just nothing unusual, and there's nothing exciting about that. I mean, it's, there's no, they were this big religious, leader, they were a pastor, or they were this or that or the other thing, but now they're atheist. And it's like, no, they've always been atheist. They were just had a belief system, a religion, and now they've just dropped the religion. But what they believe fundamentally hasn't changed, which is, they've never met Jesus. They've never encountered him.
So an encounter with God will make something in you stand out, an obvious change?
Everything about you. It's everything. I mean, it's not a single thing. It's your entire. The word that I use when I describe this is, when I got saved, my entire physiology changed. Who I was as a person changed.
Yeah.
Not just all of a sudden I started doing good things. My whole outlook on life, both internally and externally, was transformed. Right at that moment. Not years later, not developed over time.
So is the change like, could you say it's cookie cutter? Like, it's like, you're like, everybody it's the same change. It's the same result.
I wouldn't call it cookie cutter, but I would call it classic. Classic is
Okay.
probably a better way of describing. Cookie cutter would assume that everybody is identical, which isn't really the case. But classic, I mean, that would be a typical conversion experience, is somebody who their whole, their ethos, their entire ethos of life is totally transformed. It aligns immediately with, like with Zacchaeus. So the interesting thing with Zacchaeus is that Zacchaeus happened to choose those particular things, but those were because they were the most outstanding in his life, because he was a tax collector. And so that's the main thing, is that so immediately, without, nobody had to tell him the major problems in his life. And this isn't just a guilt thing.
Yeah.
He right away is, there was a similar thing that happened to me when I got saved, because my thing, I wasn't a tax collector. I was a nightclub hopper. That was my thing. And so immediately, when I encountered Jesus, that was the thing that was first called into question in my mind, is that, you know what? I'm not going to be sleeping with girls anymore. I'm just not doing that anymore. And so it wasn't just, I'm not going to go to the nightclubs. It was the entire lifestyle. I'm not going to do the lifestyle anymore. So I'm not drinking. I'm not going to nightclubs. I'm not having sex outside of marriage. I'm not doing any of that. So it wasn't just that there was a thing that changed. Everything changed.
We got one more question on the encounter, and then I want to move forward a little bit. But Christelle's asking, was a Zacchaeus encounter the same as the rich young ruler?
No. And that's a good question to illustrate what I'm talking about, because no, they weren't the same. They weren't the same at all, because Zacchaeus got saved, and the rich young ruler did not get saved.
But was the encounter the same?
No. No, but that's my point. So that's my point, is that he saw Jesus, he met Jesus, but he didn't see Jesus as Jesus was. See, Zacchaeus did. Zacchaeus understood that who he was talking to was God in the flesh. He understood that it wasn't just his mind that was under scrutiny. It was his entire being was under scrutiny. And see, so with the rich young ruler, it was just, this is just my mind. I feel like there's something missing. I know I don't have eternal life, but I don't know how to get there. But his conversation with Jesus is clearly that he didn't meet Jesus. He met Jesus' human body, but he didn't meet Jesus. And that's important.
Yeah. Okay, so let's stick to that for a sec, because I want to ask the question of why, if you're thinking about the word saved. Now, let me ask you this first. Is the word saved really the right word to use in translation of what the Bible says when it says saved?
Well, it's the word that's used in the Bible, so I would say yes, because but the idea of the word means it needs to be made whole.
Yeah.
And so
but when I think
today,
of
yeah,
see, when I think of saved,
yeah.
I'm thinking like burning building. Somebody
Rescued.
said rescued. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there is a truth to that. There is a truth of being rescued, but it's more than being rescued. It's being it's being made whole. There's more to it than just being rescued. But
one's a lot more dramatic than the other.
I can't think of a better word, though. I honestly can't think of a better
word.
Well,
what I mean, though, is the translation of saved, or the mental image you get of when you say saved, is not necessarily referring to things like a pie being filled. You know what I mean? It's like I said, it's a lot more dramatic than that. And so what's the right way to look at this here?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is I can't think of a better word. I don't know the how to use a better word than saved, but because that is the closest word that I can think of is to being saved, is because there's so many other things that are involved in it. The idea of being saved. Okay, so we're going to destroy our lives.
Yeah,
the way we're headed.
Yeah, that's where I'm headed. What are you being saved from?
Yeah. Well, we're destroying ourselves by our sin, and that's the thing, is that the longer we're alive, the more of a wreck we're making of our lives without Jesus. And it doesn't, you might be able to make money, you might be able to invent things, you might be able to do a lot of stuff, but the damage that is being caused by you yourself, you and your sin, because we can only keep so much of our sin under control. It gets out of control. I've often used the examples of people that, famous people that have gotten divorced. And it's like, if they've got it going on, then they should have stayed married, because they've got it going on. And so, but they a lot of times the reason why, I mean, you just look at some of the cases, it's stuff you look at it and you lose respect for these people, because you think, wow, did you really did that? Somebody who's, some idol, some rock star or some movie star or something like that, slapping his wife around or something like that. You don't look at that and go, well, he's only human. You look at that and say, really? In your type of life, the things that you've achieved, you can't control beating your wife. You act like some classic drunk person, And but that's true of all of us. And that's what I'm talking about is salvation is, being God coming into you, living inside of you and changing you as a person. And like we talked about with Zacchaeus, where you're not the same person anymore. You're not that guy that beats his wife. You're not that guy that gets drunk or that person, guy or girl, that gets depressed, or you're not that person anymore. And the tragedy is that a lot of Christianity today is there are a lot of drunk Christians and a lot of depressed Christians and these kinds of things, and it's a contradiction. It's a contradiction, because how can you be a drunk Christian or a depressed Christian? But yet these are things that have just become acceptable. They're just acceptable. And that's why, when we talk about being saved, a depressed Christian, are they saved? Saved from what? I mean, how are they saved? And so we start making these weird distinctions of, well, they're going to heaven, but, they're still having to deal with problems in their lives and stuff like that. Well, what does it mean to be saved then? If you're a person who's prone to depression and then you get saved and you're still depressed, did you get saved? And I'm not talking about perfection, but I am talking about freedom.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that, there have been times in my life where I have experienced grief, or I've experienced discouragement, but they're moments. And we've talked about this before. They're moments. It's not my life. It's not my existence, because I have Jesus, so it's like, I might get discouraged because something didn't happen, but it doesn't take very long for me to get over that because I have Jesus. I'm saved.
So the reason I was asking that is because I'm trying to think of how, and obviously I don't know what happens behind closed doors, but we can equally assume either good or bad. But I know people, and I'm sure people as well, who on the surface everything seems fine. It's not like, they don't seem like people that struggle with depression. They don't have like substance abuse issues. They don't, they're for the most part, they work jobs. They have a family. They live, quote unquote normal lives. And so how do you apply this same level of need to somebody like that?
So you're saying these are people that they don't believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
You're saying
people
they
who
don't.
are unsaved.
Yeah.
Or not
See,
Christian.
I haven't met anybody like that. So I don't.
You haven't met anybody on the surface that seems fine. They don't have any obvious, destructive issues in their life.
You mean that are hiding all those things?
Maybe. That's my point, though.
I mean,
is that always the case?
I'm sure that I've met people that try to hide those kinds of things, but engaging in conversation, it usually comes out that, there are issues. There are always issues, because we're sinners. You can't.
So you're saying that sin will always create an obvious issue for an individual?
No, it will always create an issue, but it won't always be obvious.
Right. Well, that's my point, though. How do you convince people who don't see the obvious?
No.
Or who it's not obvious?
You're saying two things. Just because something's not obvious doesn't mean that they don't know about it.
Well, I'm talking from their perspective, though.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I've never met anybody from their perspective that has said, you know what, my life is absolutely everything I've always wanted. Just never met anybody like that. So it's a hypothetical situation that I don't believe exists.
Yeah. So explain, when Jesus tells, I'm trying to remember the actual context, and it's just popping in my head right now, but when Jesus says, them that are well have no need of a physician. So he's talking to people that obviously didn't feel like they needed anything with
Right.
Jesus, and he's hanging out with people who have the
But think about the
obvious problems.
Yeah, think about the context of that. They also said that we've never been in bondage to any man.
Yeah.
They were in bondage to Rome. They were just in denial.
Right.
So it wasn't.
So is that what it is, though? Is it denial, or
Well,
is
in
it
their case, it was.
okay?
But see, that's my point. That's the point that I'm making. Is I've never met anybody like that. What I mean is regardless of whether they don't want to admit it, you know, or they're hiding it, it's still there.
Yeah.
You know, it's still there. You know, you can try to ignore it and hide it, but in an honest conversation, that stuff comes out. I mean, like to say something like that for the the Pharisees to say we've been in bondage to no man, when they're under Roman occupation. I mean, they're literally under Roman occupation, and they say we've never been in bondage to anybody. But not only that, the children of Israel were taken into Babylon. The entire nation was taken into Babylon. So how can they say that they were never in bondage to anybody? I mean, it's just outright fiction.
Right.
You know, so that's what I say is when you're talking about how can you convince somebody of these kinds of things? Well, somebody who's in denial, you can't convince them of anything.
Right.
There's nothing you can do
So-
for that.
If salvation is so incredible, so amazing, so fulfilling, in its truest form.
Well, I don't remember saying any of that.
No, but okay, no, just bear with me. I'm going.
So you're
going
to create a
No,
question based on
no.
a fallacy.
No, you can answer the question as a whole, but take it for what it's worth. That's just pretend you're not talking to me here. You're talking to somebody else. Okay, you're not talking to Jordan.
But anybody who said that, I would be saying that.
Okay, but how do you convince somebody, like, let's use the Pharisees again, that they're, what's going on here? If salvation is what it's supposed to be, and you're being rescued from something, or you're being made to be fulfilled or filled whole, why is it such an issue? Why is it so difficult for people to feel the need for that?
Why our makeup? We're just we're prideful people. We don't like to admit that we have a problem. It's just human nature.
But didn't God make us? So if God made me with this nature, how come it's so?
God didn't make us with the nature to be full of pride. He gave us. He created us to be what I've described, to be made whole.
Right.
That's not necessarily what we want. I don't think as human beings that we are concerned about being made whole as much as we're concerned about being selfishly fulfilled.
What do you mean by that?
Whatever, kill all my enemies, and kill my boss that won't give me a raise, and give me a boss that will give me more of a raise than I deserve. Just stuff like that.
So how does someone's lifestyle change? And you mentioned, your entire physiology, but what does that look like? How does a saved person differ from somebody who's not saved? Well, the reason I asked that, hold on. The reason I asked that is because when you look at like Jesus' life, he really wasn't even in terms of like the day that he was living in, he wasn't typical. You know what I mean? He was kind of like a traveling evangelist in a sense, for the 3 years at least that we see him ministering. He wasn't like any of the other religious groups. He wasn't like anybody really. He was kind of nomadic. He traveled around. He performed ministry, miracles, all that. And so how does a Christian mimic that lifestyle today? Like in the modern world, do they just quit their job and start going from city to city preaching like Jesus did? And
well, I don't remember Jesus quitting his job.
Well, no, define it.
Well,
I'm asking for explanation.
Yeah. Well, so okay. So just to give a general definition, the basic idea is that we read about Jesus. Jesus is a normal human being. That was part of the problem, that when he began to teach, that they had a problem with, is they said, well, I know who you are. We know your parents. We know your brothers and sisters. We know your upbringing. We know who you are. I mean, we know everything about you. And so now you're trying to tell us you're somebody else. And that was never the case. He was always that person. They just didn't know him at that level because they only knew him from his normalcy. They didn't know him from his actual, because we get, when you read the Gospels, we get a glimpse, especially in the book of Luke, we get a glimpse. He said to his parents, "Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" But that wasn't common knowledge. He wasn't running around telling people God's my Father,
Right.
and not Joseph. He wasn't doing that. I mean, that wasn't what was happening. And so as what we are as Christians is to be whatever we were before physically, but
As far as like,
you look in the New Testament. I mean, people didn't quit their jobs to go do that. There were some that Jesus employed, that he called them from their jobs, but not everybody.
so you're saying it's different for different people.
Yeah.
Keep going. I interrupted you.
Oh, well, so
He employed certain people, but not everybody.
yeah, but everybody was different.
Uh-huh.
Everybody was changed. Everybody was what they were similar in their physiology. And it's probably not the right word to use. It'd probably be more like metaphysiology. But they're you go on your job, you are an example now. You're just it's so hard to put into words. It's so difficult without making it into some kind of religious thing. Is that when you've had an encounter with Jesus and you are genuinely influenced by Jesus, like Zacchaeus was, like him. He went around. I'm sure if we were to watch Zacchaeus from that moment on, he's not burning people anymore. He's not ripping people off anymore. He's being a reasonable tax collector. He's giving to the poor. He's compassionate. He's not the same person that he was and never will be, but he still had the same vocation. Still had the same friends, as much as would want to continue a friendship with him, being the sort of new Zacchaeus. Probably had new friends as well, but it wasn't about having this sort of it wasn't a religious-y thing. It was just he was just a different person.
See, but the two sound, from I'm just trying to think from an unchurched mindset. How do you differentiate the two off first glance? They both seem to look very similar.
They do.
And so how do you determine the difference? How do you find out what a real saved person looks like based off of personality?
Well, they should be telling you.
Okay.
Yeah, if they're saved, then they will be telling you, because there is no way to just tell by looking.
Yeah.
You can only tell by observation of that person interacting with the rest of the planet. That's how you know whether somebody has encountered Jesus the way Zacchaeus has. Is that you can see it. They're different.
Yeah.
They're different. They're like Jesus.
Yeah. So you're kind of answering this question already, but maybe you can go a little deeper with it. How does someone who's saved relate to the world, the rest of the world?
How does someone who is saved relate to the rest of the world?
Yeah. So you make all these like drastic changes, and you're all of a sudden you're a different person. Now, how do you relate to the rest of the world?
Well, it's not making a bunch of changes. See, that's it. That's the thing. When I think about my own personal encounter with Jesus and my salvation and conversion, I didn't. Most of the, I would run into people that didn't know that I had become a Christian, and there was no. I wasn't different from the standpoint of I can't talk to you anymore, I don't know you, or anything like that. I was the same, but the difference, like I remember specifically, I was going to it was up in the mountains in Arizona, And it was a place that, we used to go during the summertime. A lot of young people would go during the summertime. And so people I knew went up there a lot. And so I'm on my way up there, and I get into this. It was a tram that took us up, and I saw some friends I hadn't seen since I had become a Christian. And so one of them said, "I heard you got religion." And I was like, wow, that's surprising, because this is somebody I hadn't seen for a long time. And so the word was going around, and he wasn't even a close friend of mine, but the word was going around that I wasn't the same person, but yet I was the same person physically. I mean, I didn't change the way that I looked or anything like that. I mean, in terms of, I wasn't, wearing a robe and, sandals or anything like that. I mean, I was still just the same person that I'd always been. And so, and I just told him, I said, I met Jesus. Jesus came into my life. I don't smoke pot anymore. I don't drink anymore. I don't go to nightclubs. I'm not, my vocabulary had changed. I'm not swearing, but these were not changes that I affected, because that all happened the night that I got saved. So all of these things were things that had happened to me the night I got saved. It wasn't like I started, this sort of rehab, and changing things in my life. I was just not the same.
Do you think that people fear giving up control when it comes to accepting Jesus? Is that a deal breaker?
Again, so those kinds of things are all peripheral issues. That's why going back to this idea of Zacchaeus is so important. You look at the rich young ruler, and he went away because he had great possessions. Well, so did Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus had great possessions as well, but he didn't care whether he lost them or not. So what was the difference? I mean, they're actually quite similar. You look at Zacchaeus's bio, and you look at the rich young ruler's bio, they were very similar. But Zacchaeus got saved and the rich young ruler didn't. Well, what was it? Well, it was because Zacchaeus had actually encountered Jesus. And so it's not a question of, that there are certain concerns or fears or things like that. It's a much more, I don't know how to describe it. It's a much more holistic picture. It's just simply because of the rich young ruler's preoccupation with himself and his situation. He wasn't able to get that revelation of who Jesus was. It wasn't, I got the revelation of Jesus, thanks but no thanks. That wasn't the case.
So I remember, I've actually heard this a couple times over the years, and I'm curious as to, first off, is this even true? And second off, how does, if it is or isn't, just what's the real answer here? I've heard preachers say, you when you get saved, you don't got to stop hanging out with your friends. Your friends will stop hanging out with you. And I'm curious as to is that true? First off, and second off, how is that attractive at all?
Well, there is a truth to it. Certain friends, not all of them, but certain friends who have because your life becomes a reference point, that Jesus is real. And so your friends are going to have to decide if they want to remain friends with you, whether or not to accept the fact that Jesus is real. So you don't have to worry about, not hanging out with people that are, a bad influence.
Yeah.
If you are genuine, so that part's true,
right?
From that standpoint.
But this isn't some kind of issue of Christians are just obnoxious people and people will stop wanting to hang out with you.
No,
you become
not
something different.
Yeah,
How do you?
Yeah, not at all.
So this goes back to my relation to the world thing.
Yeah,
how do you relate to the world?
Yeah, you
how did you go about your relationship with your friends when you got saved?
I invited them to come to church.
Why?
I just explained to them, because I that's how I met Jesus. Was by going and seeing this demonstrated live in the lives of other people, And so I invited them to come because that's how I got saved. Somebody invited me to come, and I didn't want to come, and I didn't want to come because I figured I already knew about Christianity. I had visited churches growing up. I wasn't from a religious home, but I had friends that went to church, and they invited me to go, and I wasn't interested. It wasn't didn't you know I was 16. I had a car. I could drive myself places, and I had friends of mine that invite me places, and so I would drive myself to church. So I'm driving there, and their parents are telling them, as long as you're living in my house, you're going to go to church. Where I didn't have that, and so my experience was that most of the people that I knew that went to church went because they had no choice, and I have never encountered people who had encountered Jesus. I've just never met anybody like that.
So how you mentioned this a second ago. I'm just going to ask the question again so you can just refresh it. But who is the one that saves? When someone gets saved, who is it? Who is it that saves?
Jesus.
So yeah, it was a simple answer. It wasn't a trick question. But so my question is, if God is the one that saves people, then how come so much is riding on a man's decision to be saved?
Well, so
and the reason why I'm asking is because, is this like we've talked a little bit about this before, but you can give clarity on this. Is this an election thing?
Yeah, no. God, see, that's the thing is again, you have these two examples, and we keep coming back to this, of Zacchaeus and the rich young ruler.
Mm-hmm.
Two examples of two people that both had the same opportunity, same everything, met the same Jesus, but the issue of encounter of Jesus in his fullness didn't happen with the rich young ruler. That did not happen because of his state of mind, his state of thinking.
So Jesus' presentation to either one of them was not different. Like they met Jesus the same way then.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So they both had an equal opportunity.
Yeah.
To respond.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And this is the problem with a lot of the thinking on Christianity, that Jesus saving us is not what most people think. Most people think when they think about Jesus saving them, you're drowning in a river, and somebody reaches in and grabs you and pulls you out.
Yeah.
And they save you. And if they can't reach in and pull you out, that's because they can't save you. This is all on the person doing the saving, not the person being saved. Where salvation in Christianity is nothing like that. It is nothing like that. Mm-hmm. It is completely the opposite. It is the I don't know what I would compare it to in terms of a illustration. But it's not. That's so us drowning in a river and Jesus standing on the bank, grabbing out to grab a hold of this is not exactly a clear picture. But I could try to save that illustration, but it would just get weirder and weirder, because it'd be like, Jesus tries to throw us a life preserver, and we push it away. We don't want it. Well, if you really want to be saved, then you're not going to push it away. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I mean about the idea of it getting weird, is that, somehow we don't want to be saved. It's not an issue of that, people don't want to be saved. It's an issue of that, the understanding in people's minds of understanding that they need to be rescued. If somebody was standing at the bank of a river yelling at you, give me your hand, and you weren't drowning, you just think they're a weirdo. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't look at them and go, oh, I get it. You think I'm drowning and you want to help me. Oh, that's very nice. We wouldn't do that. It'd be like, what are you saying? Well, why are you acting like that? Can you not see I'm fine? Mm-hmm. And so this, when it comes to being saved, we have to understand that you have to understand that you need to be saved. The rich young ruler didn't. He said, what must I do to have eternal life? I know I'm lacking something. I know I'm missing something because of eternal life, but it obviously wasn't that serious. Because if it was serious, he would have did what Jesus said. Jesus said, well, you have to sell all that you have and come and follow me, and then you'll have treasure in heaven, and then you'll have eternal life. And he would have went, okay, that's it. That's what I needed. But it wasn't that serious to him. He's like, no, wait a minute. I'm okay. I'm all right. No, 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 no. And the Bible, when the Bible says he went away sorrowful, we get this idea that, that he had made this really super conscious decision of, oh, I'm going to go to hell for all eternity because I can't give up my riches, and that's just taking the thinking too far. Jesus told him what to do and he didn't want to do it, but he respected Jesus. He respected him as a teacher. Good teacher, what must I do? What good thing must I do to have eternal life? He respected Jesus. He comes running to Jesus. He kneels at Jesus. And so he's being very respectful. And then Jesus tells him what to do, and he doesn't want to be disrespectful. And so he goes away sorrowful, because he's like, I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't want to do it. But if he had grasped what was at stake. And Jesus says how hard it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. He says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, because there's a whole mental process, of understanding the truth about where you are and about who you are and about what you need.
Yeah. So, but that's kind of why I was asking the question before around the issue of somebody's conscious mind towards needing to be saved.
Yeah.
Are you talking about something that like people just don't understand, or are they just proud and don't want to admit it? Are they just hiding it consciously?
Yeah. Well, it's a little of all of that, because it depends on at what moment you're considering what thought. Like with the rich young ruler, I doubt very seriously that he was saying, I'm all right, because how could he be saying I'm all right and then say, what am I lacking? I know, what must I do to inherit eternal life? I've done all those things from my youth. He tells him, keep the commandments. And he says, well, what am I lacking? So there's an understanding there that I'm not where I should be, but at the same time, how far away am I? I don't think I'm that far away. It's that kind of a thing. You can see it by his answers and by how he deals with things, and then walks away sorrowfully. No doubt he was going to go away and try to fabricate his own salvation. From there, he was going to try to do something, try plan B.
I mean, is it possible that this is total speculation, but is it possible, based on your understanding of human nature, that this guy was expecting Jesus to say, you're all good?
Well, he was probably expecting for Jesus to say something that he could do. Because good master, what good thing must I do to have eternal life? He's like, I know I'm missing something. I mean, I've done a lot of good stuff in my life. I've, kept all the commandments from my youth up and, all that. So, this is his thinking. And there's no reason to think that he didn't, reasonably think he had kept those commandments. But I think he was anticipating that there would be just something that he needed to do, like, give $5 or $100 or, something like that, not to give up everything, And so when he was confronted with that issue, it was like, okay, this is as far as he was willing to go. He wasn't going to go that far. Whereas with Zacchaeus was willing to go as far as was necessary. Mm-hmm. And so he had that encounter, that mm-hmm. genuine encounter with Jesus. I know what I need to do, Jesus. I think that's another thing that needs to be seen as well, is that Jesus didn't have to tell Zacchaeus what he needed to do.
Yeah.
Zacchaeus knew what he needed to do. And I can't help but think that the rich young ruler didn't have some measure of, a sense that, there was more to it. Because he's telling Jesus, what must I do to have eternal life? It's almost implied in the question is, I've been thinking about this and I can't figure it out. I know I'm missing something, but I just don't know what it is. And the reason is because the thing that it was something he was just simply unwilling to even consider.
We have a question here. It might be off topic, but Christians putting on the helmet of salvation. Can you explain what that means?
Okay, so yeah, so I think we're at that point to go off topic. Um, that's okay.
I've got kind of a closing question, so you don't need to take tons of time on.
Oh,
Just
okay. Well, yeah, the idea. So yeah, um, it's a mental state. Putting on the helmet of salvation, which it isn't quite off topic because it's a mental state. How we think. You have to have a mind open to salvation. That's the whole idea about putting on the helmet of salvation. Yeah, a helmet is a protective thing. So there's an understanding, which I think it portrays in the difference between Zacchaeus and Jesus. Um, Zacchaeus and the rich young ruler. That Zacchaeus had put on salvation. And he was able to make the hard decisions, restoring fivefold, giving to the poor, giving half of his goods. That's a very important concept, to think of, that he was willing to give half of his goods to the poor. That's a pretty big chunk, if you have, and especially if you have a lot of money, when you've only got $10, it's no big deal to give somebody $5, but when you have $1 million to give away $500,000, that's very different. And I would say that would probably be a better way of looking at the rich young ruler is that he was saying, I'm going to give away half. And then out of the half that he had left, he was going to restore 5 times what he had stolen from other people. So who knows where that would have put him. Mm-hmm. We don't know because we don't know how dishonest he was.
Yeah.
But so the idea of the helmet of salvation is it's a thinking. It's got to be a willingness. I could go into that in detail. Probably a whole podcast we could do on that whole idea. But the thinking part is so important. It's so critical to everything. Because we can see that how the rich young ruler thought and how Zacchaeus thought were what made the difference. That's what made the difference, was how they thought, what they were willing to entertain in terms of thinking. Mm-hmm. And so the helmet of salvation's definitely going to deal with your thinking and being able to think at a level that goes beyond the normal. This is why for me it's such a frustrating thing. I mean, we're talking about this and we're talking, and I'm inside, I'm getting all frustrated because it's such an academic conversation about something that's so simple, and dancing around the edges of it is so simple. Is that if people would just decide, that they're not going to try to figure all this out, and instead of trying to figure it out and fight against it and try to manipulate things in their own thinking so that they can just simply understand who Jesus is, if we just stop doing that, this whole thing becomes a real easy thing to do. It becomes so easy to achieve when you're able to do it, when you're able to just say, you know what, I'm not going to try to retain my old way of thinking about things. I'm not going to justify my behavior, my attitude. Like when I got saved, I'm not going to sleep around. It didn't matter what I wanted to do or what I was comfortable with or what was normal to me. None of those things ever played into that. It was like, oh, no, that's it. If the rich young ruler, okay, get rid of it all. Okay, fine. Get rid of it all. He would have understood. It would have all come clear. He would have had a very clear understanding of the benefit of doing that, is because he would have been taken care of by Jesus. He would have entered into a whole different economy. We talk about this when it comes to giving. Give and it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Is that as a Christian, when you make that transition from I've got to get, save, to I'm going to give. All of a sudden you begin to realize that giving is better than saving, but you can only enter into that understanding by becoming a giver. Is that when you become a giver, you realize I can never give to a point to where I'm not able to receive. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work like that.
So, okay. I would say that in what you just said, it seems like most people sit at where the rich young ruler is. He thought about all this before he walked up to Jesus. He worked out obviously some sort of scenario. He had some idea of how Jesus was going to answer in his mind.
Yeah.
But Zacchaeus was impressed by Jesus.
Yeah.
He was watching him from a distance.
Yeah.
Jesus comes to his house.
Yeah.
No prompting from Jesus whatsoever. Like I said, no miracle, no
Yeah.
big, huge fanfare. It was just like, I'm wrong and I want to be different. I'll do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Why are some people so impressed with Jesus and some people so analytical about him?
Well, it's not so much that people are analytical, because that would be misleading to call them analytical. To be
Oh, you're talking about overthinking it. You're talking about thinking
it's
too
not
much
even
into it.
overthinking it. It's being sneaky.
What do you mean sneaky?
It's the
Because this comes right down to how
Yeah.
people view Jesus. The
Yeah.
rich young
Well,
ruler
it's-
obviously didn't see him the same way Zacchaeus did.
No, it isn't. It isn't about how they saw Jesus. It's about how they saw life.
Okay.
That's the thing that's different, is how they saw life. And so with Zacchaeus, he saw life as something that was in the hands of God, and Jesus being, God's man, whatever level of revelation, that if I put myself into Jesus' hands, I'm going to be in the right place. Where the rich young ruler was, his thinking was on the basis of, I can't lose control. It's sort of like what Karina said about giving up control. Is there is an element of that plays into this. Is yes, there is an element of giving up control, relinquishing control to God. Trusting God with my life. Is that is the essence of it. But the reason why I use the word sneaky is because we pretend that's not the issue. We pretend that the issue is some more practical thing. Well, okay, one of the things that I hear, people say, well, if I give my life to Jesus, is he gonna put food on my table? Is he gonna put clothes on my kid's back? Is he gonna, pay for the roof over my head? If I give my life to Jesus? Well, the answer to that is yes. Not in the way that you're sarcastically saying. He's not going to come down and start paying your bills and stuff like that. But what he's able to do in you as a person will put food on your table.
Mm-hmm.
What he's able to do in you will put clothes on your children's back, will put a roof over your head. What he's able to do in you will do those things.
So, but okay, let me push a little further, because you're talking. Let's go back to the rich young ruler. He leaves sorrowfully after obviously not hearing what he wanted to hear, and Jesus turns to his disciples who are following him, and he says, "Hard is it for a rich man to enter in the kingdom of heaven." He gives us this analogy, and their first reaction, they're following him. They've already left all to follow Jesus. They say, "Who then can be saved?"
Yeah.
Who then can be saved? Obviously, they're even questioning themselves in that moment.
Yeah.
That's the common thinking. Like,
Right.
what? Who then can be saved? Everybody
Right.
wants to be rich, right?
No, you're missing.
No, I'm asking the question.
But no, you're missing. You're missing.
I'm not
what was
missing anything.
actually-
I'm asking you. What is it?
Okay, you're missing what was said.
Uh-huh.
Jesus didn't say, hard is it for people who want to be rich to enter the kingdom of God.
Uh-huh.
That's not what he said.
Okay.
He said, hard is it for a rich man
Uh-huh.
to enter the kingdom of God. So what does that tell you about the disciples when they say, well, then who then can be saved?
They were all rich.
They were all rich. So the understanding, that all the people that follow Jesus were all poor people. They're all broke. That's a misnomer. That's not true. Because they're looking at this going, wait a minute, we're rich. How are we going to get in?
Yeah.
Who could be saved? Because we're rich. But then they turn around and they say, we've given everything. So you have to see there is that they didn't see, the rich man saw by giving his wealth away and following Jesus would mean he would become poor. But when the disciples gave away their wealth, quote unquote, and followed Jesus, they left their jobs and various things. They didn't see themselves as becoming poor. They were still rich. So the two don't go hand in hand. If I give everything away, I'll be broke. That's not necessarily the case. And this wasn't the case with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus didn't say, well, I'm giving all this away, so I'm going to be broke, but I'm going to follow Jesus anyway. And the disciples didn't say that either. because they gave everything up and they still went on to follow Jesus, but they still didn't see themselves as broke. It was only the rich young ruler who saw that. And that's what I mean about being sneaky is that, wait a minute, I'm only doing this because I don't want to be broke. I'm just trying, I'm trying to, no, you're playing sneaky with your thinking, because you're pretending that your concern is about being broke. But the truth is that when you surrender everything to Jesus, you're not broke. You get something that you could never have gotten. And so he's playing games, in his thinking, because I honestly believe that everyone who has the opportunity to meet Jesus and to give their lives to Jesus, that it comes down to that decision. Ultimately, it comes down to that decision. Are you going to have an encounter with Jesus and let him change you? Or are you going to play games in your thinking, and try to pretend like I can't because of this or that or the other thing, or Jesus can't do this or whatever, are you just going to play thinking games? And I think that's really what it comes down to. And I think this is where religion comes in, is because religion is the product of the thinking game, is that I'm not going to surrender everything to Jesus. I'm not going to give my life 100% to Jesus and have that encounter. I'm going to create my own version of salvation, whether it's a derivative of Christianity or whatever. It's this thing, that I'm going to hang on to, this religion, that I'm going to hang on to and call that Jesus. But it's just sneaky thinking. You're playing games.
So what is, okay, this is the last question. What is the mindset somebody needs to have to experience Jesus like Zacchaeus did?
The kind of mindset that Zacchaeus had.
What was that? Identify it clearly.
Well, I mean,
simply.
It comes down to a complete willingness to surrender all. That really has to be the issue, and that's what makes it salvation. Is that there has to be that point, and that is the distinction between Christian and non-Christian. I know lots of people who have they claim to be Christians but haven't surrendered everything. There are things that they're hanging on to, things that they're going to continue to do, things that they've, before they got saved, that they're still hanging on to after they get saved, that they're just not willing to give up. I look at my salvation, and there's nothing that I didn't give up before I got saved. It was a 100% surrender. Everything went into Jesus' hands. Everything did. There wasn't anything that that I said, I'm keeping this. I don't really care what Jesus thinks about it. Everything, all my, the good and the bad, it was everything went into Jesus' hands. And so when I prayed and asked Jesus to come into my life, it was with the intention that I am giving up everything. I am literally giving up everything. And then whatever comes back to me after giving all that up, well, it's going to be because God has given it back to me, not because I've played some kind of mental game and said, well, I have to do this, or I have to be like that, or this has to work this way, and trying to finagle my way into God's way.
Well, that's all I have as far as questions go. Any closing thoughts before we cut out?
Nothing directly, but for those who are not saved, who are watching this, you may know people who claim to be saved and be questioning, their behavior. We're looking at what I described is playing sneaky games. That's not, that's not how it's supposed to be. People who are saved, Jesus comes into their lives and everything changes. Everything changes, and that's what Jesus is holding out to everyone, to you as well, who have not given your life to Jesus. He holds out that same thing. It has to be a total surrender. There has to be a 100% total surrender, wherever that may lead. And so that is the only true salvation.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, we will be having our podcast next week, and that will be our 1-year anniversary. So we'll try to think of something crazy to do, and we hope that this is helpful. We know especially for those who are new to this. We if you're in the area, we have service here, and we really do want to help you. We want you to come. You can check us out online, but we invite you to come in person, be a part of a service. We have our midweek service tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come and see for yourself. Come and meet Jesus for yourself. That really is why we're here. We want to introduce you to Jesus so that you can have an encounter with Jesus the way that we have. And so keep those in mind. You can find more information for us about us online in our website or through the YouTube channel. And we will see everybody soon.